Welcome to the Town of Littleton Board of Health meeting for June 26, 2024. In attendance today, we have Matt Weiss and myself, Dan Kane, Kevin Baker, our Health Director, Francis Daigle, and our Health Administrator, Jim Graffi. We have a quorum, so we will start. Our 7 o'clock agenda item is a discussion on Board of Health regulations for private wells. We spent some time talking about this last meeting, and I would like to spend more than 10 minutes on it, but less than 2 hours on it tonight. So if it's all right with my other members, I think what we should do is, once again, look at it, have Francis run the show and scroll through it, and maybe approve small corrections and stuff like that. But for anything larger, I want to identify those sections and say, this section needs A, discussion, or B, rewriting or redrafting with some different language. And then see if anybody's wildly interested in doing those things, if we can get that work sent out so people can go redraft a sentence or two or a paragraph. Or if we identified something that's particularly sticky that just needs a larger discussion, that way we could put it on the agenda potentially for a pointed topic for another date. Especially if there are only 3 of us here tonight. I don't want to make all the final decisions without all of our members necessarily. So does that sound reasonable to try? All right, Francis, would you be so kind as to pull it up and drive?
Yeah, I'm having some difficulty opening it.
I can go ahead and do it then. I got it up.
Okay. Yeah, it's just not looking right. I'm sorry.
Okay. In that case, while we go through, can you make notes on where we stop in sections that we say we're going to come back and do A, B, or C to it?
Yep.
Okay. All right, all C? Okay. I'm going to scroll down through a lot of the stuff we already talked about. So definitions, a lot of our conversation last time was about agricultural / and or irrigation wells. So I'm not sure exactly where we landed on it discussion-wise, but what I would like to do is actually share something else real quick and see what you guys think. I threw out the idea of, should we kind of categorize it a little bit to help us quasi back into, or at least figure out how we should phrase things so that it makes the language of the whole regulation as smooth as possible. So if we share, so low budget here. One way I looked at it, everybody see this one now? This chart? Nods. Okay. One way I looked at it as wells, okay, we have residential wells, we have an agricultural section of wells, and we have other wells. Within residential, your well might be a drinking well, it might be an irrigation well. I want to carve out rental as a different conversation topic, so I put it there so I wouldn't forget it. And then agricultural, does that mean commercial? In my head, I think maybe. You could have an animal well or you could have a crop well. And maybe if we decide that those don't need to be different in the definition base, then great, we can collapse these boxes. And then I threw in other, like monitoring, closed loop geothermal, and abandoned, again, just so I wouldn't forget about it, since we call these kind of types out. I specifically put closed loop geothermal and not open loop geothermal, because as soon as you have an open loop geothermal, as far as I'm concerned, open loop is connecting into your well in some other way, so you have access to that water. So I think if you have an open loop system, you're probably going to fall under another category because you're also using that water for irrigation or something else potentially. So that's why I left it off. And then another way to kind of cut this would be I just bucket wise, I said, okay, well, you could have drinking wells, which are either private or rental property. You could have private non-drinking wells, which would be, I think, just be irrigation. And then you could have agricultural. And again, should that be commercial agricultural? And then another other category. So thoughts, does this help? Is this something we should do? And a piece of me also thinks that regulations are always fun to read for members of the public. And if we did adopt some sort of structure like this, perhaps we could make some materials eventually to help people understand where they should be looking and what they should be following. But I throw that out there just to see what your thoughts are. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks for putting these charts together. It's great that you took the time to do this. I appreciate it. I think I liked your first slide better. I think I just thought it was a little bit more concise. And I'd love to hear what Jim and Francis and other members of the board have to say about it. I think rental falls under residential. I know there were some different testing requirements called out in the model regs. I don't know that we specifically need to do that for pre-existing, rental property wells. For new construction rental, maybe. But yeah, I think this is great. I love that you call out for agricultural, for animals and crops, and even the abandoned wells. I think you got everything covered here. So nice visual representation Francis, of what we're trying to cover.
No, I agree. I like having rental under there, I think, because there is a higher level of standard for a rental property than for an owner-occupied. That, an owner-occupied has some control over what happens in their own house, where if I'm renting, I can't control the water unless I know what's there. So I think that's appropriate. I think that's in the model regs. So I think having that under there as a carve-out is a good reminder that it is treated slightly differently. We want to make sure that we call that out. So I agree with that. But yeah, no, I think this breakdown works relatively well. It may make the flow a little bit easier to understand. So rather than looking at individual well, it's looking at location, I guess, rather than my grass watering well here at my house is going to be different than a commercial farm or a commercial grower. So I think that's reasonable.
Yep. Jim, Francis, thoughts? Are we missing anything?
So the only thing I've been seeing a few more of, and I guess the water rates have gone up in town, so that's why I'm seeing them, are irrigation wells for like the town soccer field on the corner of New Estate and Air Road. And they're looking for an irrigation well for the little park in the center of town. So I don't know where you would see those fitting. This strictly for grass. We also had one for property on Mill Road, a commercial property, an apartment complex on Mill Road. So I'm not sure where you'd see those fitting.
Yeah, rental, if it's the rental bucket. Yeah, I didn't distinguish as to whether that's privately owned or commercial owned effectively, but maybe we'll throw public in here just for now, just so we don't lose it. Because we know that exists.
Yep.
And we don't have any authority over municipal wells, right?
If they're in your regulations, you would regulate them. Right now, they're not listed in, there's no regulations for irrigation wells. So I'm using Title V when that's appropriate and issuing well permits based on that for irrigation.
Okay, but I'm even beyond that. So, like for a municipal groundwater well serving the community, is that
would be a DEP.
If I'm Wilton Water and that's DEP for
DEP. It's a public water supply well. Yep.
Okay. Nope, that's kind of my question. So I just want to make sure that was not in the mix.
So we are not going to necessarily write it into our regulation, but it's worth knowing it exists. Okay.
I mean, we could certainly put in a line in going that municipal groundwater supplies, fall under the regulation of the DEP. If we, if we're talking about residential well drinking water, municipal groundwater sources are regulated under DEP and are outside the scope of this regulation. We don't need to, but just so we basically acknowledging that we know they exist and they're out there, and we acknowledge that they are outside of our scope.
How do people feel about agricultural really being a line of, is that commercial? So that if I'm growing tomatoes in my backyard and eating them on my own tacos, that's going to stay in my residential category? Or where's the line? And do we have guidance from somewhere else that says, well, as soon as you're selling products at a farm stand, you're now commercial, so you're falling under that category? Go ahead, Kevin.
I would say that that's all determined by zoning of where the well is. And if you're on an agricultural parcel,
I guess that's my question. What if you're not on an agricultural parcel and you're not zoned for that? You're zoned for residential, but you grow a small quantity and produce somehow. Does that push you over into your water sources being considered, at least for your crops, an agricultural category? Maybe, see, I was going to say maybe it won't be important because maybe the residential irrigation and the agricultural crop/irrigation would be the same. But I don't think so, because if we know you're growing crops to sell, I'm guessing we're going to have higher monitoring and higher requirements than somebody who's watering their lawn. But if all I have is residential drinking or irrigation, and I'm technically using my irrigation well to water my plants, I don't know. Is there a clear line, or do we look another way?
It's experience from communities. I don't know that they've actually divvied them out that differently. I think they just have general categories: irrigation, agricultural, and I don't think they get that detailed as to how they're being used.
How are other places splitting up that? Because that was a question we had last time, was that different? What is the difference? Where's that line between agricultural and irrigation? Is me watering my grass different than a commercial farm watering their 20 acres versus water for their animals? Like, that's all theoretically agricultural, whether it's I'm growing my crop of grass or whether that's servicing animals in 20 acres. Where that line is between those two, and is there a line that we want to distinguish in the regs, or should there be a line? I mean, I think certainly watering my grass is going to be different than a 20 or 30 or 50 acre commercial operation, but I'm not sure how to break that down and have it make sense and where that line is.
I guess I would suggest using, Department of Agricultural regulations to kind of come up with definitions. At least you'll have definitions that are used across the board. So if somebody questions what you mean by agriculture, you've used them as a resource for a definition.
Sorry, I was changing that while you were talking, Dan, because this is where your words were kind of framing this. I went to slide 2 again. I think it looks cleaner now, Kevin, but does this actually then make more sense? It's whether you have drinking water, irrigation water, which is not connected to a food source at all, and then agricultural.
Yeah, I think this is cleaner.
Because that way you say, I don't care whether you're a farm or a homeowner, if you're watering your lawn, that's irrigation. And I don't really care whether you're a farmer or a homeowner. If you are somehow producing foods for public consumption off of your water source, then you are creating some crop.
Yeah, and then I think this covers us on irrigation wells, public irrigation wells.
All right, I'm gonna throw
Makes
out
sense.
that we've chatted about it enough. Let's see how it works, and if we like it, we use it as a tool, and if not, we can tweak it later. Sound good?
Sounds good.
So we go back to so I think one of those keynotes then, Francis, I would say is let's take that flow sheet, which I'll send out when we're done, and help make sure that we have a definition for each one of those boxes effectively. That makes sense. And then hopefully that'll remove, we'll be able to clean up all of this discussion that we had about agricultural, irrigation, etc. Fair? All right. I'm going to keep going down past definitions because we otherwise nail definitions. So section 4 is well construction permit. I think there are very few changes in here. It's a short section. So I believe I might have made this comment here because it originally said a description of prior and current land uses within 200 feet. But later on, there is some sort of condition that's within 400 feet that has to be checked. So I just wanted this language to be the same number. If it says 200 one place and 400 another, they should all say 400. So this is one, Francis, that I'm not too worried about. I think towards the end, when we've really got things nailed down, it's just going to require a final review of saying, whichever distance we decide upon is the maximum, we just have to make sure it's updated throughout the document. Good?
Yep.
Okay. And then we have the permit fee section. So similar to that flow chart we just made, I think if those buckets make sense, let's then tie these together, which I think it does, right? I think the question would be, we should add a line item for agriculture then? If those are the buckets we decide upon, kind of drinking, irrigation, agriculture, and other, we'll just make sure that we have a fee established for each of them. And Francis, are these fees, where did they come from? Or actually, you might not even know. Kevin, where did these come from?
Oh, I put those in. They're from our latest list that was approved last year.
Our fee schedule?
Yeah.
Awesome. Any questions, comments, concerns on the fees? I'm going to assume if there are no other edits or comments in here that I'm going to keep rolling through. So if somebody has a section that they're particularly want to discuss, please say something. And I would really like to figure out how we can turn off the grammar suggestions, because all these little dashed blue lines is just, it doesn't like how we're typing things, which is, you know, a regulation. So it should be that way. We'll see. Next section, water supply certificate. I don't think there are any comments in here. Standard language. Short section. Anything? Any concern? Good. Good, good. Okay. Well locations and use requirements. Here again is that comment about just the distances, because in section 2, this is where we've established the distances for all the setback requirements. So the 400 comes from the stable barnyard manure storage and the underground fuel storage or pesticide tank. Similar to above, I'm not sure where all of these ideas came from. Kevin, do you know some of them?
Jim and I went over these setbacks quite some time ago, and these are in line with what we require now.
Okay.
So that's how they differed from the model regs as they came out of the box. And Jim went through these with us and made sure they were in line with what we're used to in Littleton.
Okay. I have never heard anybody express any concern about the numbers, so I think since they come from our established setbacks, I think that's fine. The conversation topic came up last time about what about a closed loop geothermal, and should a drinking source well have some setback from a closed loop geothermal well, simply for cases of if the closed loop has a fracture and is then leaking. I have no idea what the risk would be to that. I would ask our experts on the panel to make any suggestion there if that's something we should include or it's extremely low risk and unlikely.
So, and then most towns don't. Well, Harvard has some regs on geothermals, but in towns where there's not regulations on geothermals, we generally use DEP's ground source heat pump well guidance, and they do have some offsets from wells and septic systems in there. They're much smaller than these. I mean, when the closed loop is installed, it's usually the tubing goes, so there's glycol that generally runs through the tube, but the tubing is encased in like bentonite clay. So should be a relatively low risk, but not a no risk. So as you're looking at where to put those things, I guess keep that in mind. I can shoot you over Harvard's section on geothermals if you're interested. So.
Sure, that makes sense, especially if there's something at the Massachusetts level that's called out for even from the geothermal direction. Let's look at it and get that number in here as well. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. Francis and Jim, you'll connect on that?
Yep.
Good. And similarly, we didn't change the water supply lines around sewer lines because that's a standard we already follow, correct? I have a hand raised in the audience, so I'm going to pause there since we're at the end of a section. And invite you. I can only see your number, so I'm not sure who you are. So if you please give your name and address to the board and let us know what you need.
Can you see me?
Oh, is that you, Gino?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you. We can't see you.
Okay, I'm trying to figure a thing out here. Mute, leave a hand, stay, join. Okay, join. Zoom.
All
Can
right,
you see me?
Can you hear us, Gino? We can't see you.
I can see you. Yeah, start.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out the thing here. I have a problem with my computer here. Oh, shoot.
Okay, you work on that. You can hear us. And now we have another hand raised in the audience, so I'm going to invite them in as well. So there we go. Go ahead, give your name and address for the record, please. And what do you need to ask?
Sure. My name is Chris Krauback, 105 Mattawanakie. I wanted to ask a clarifying question about the previous section. Do these apply to existing wells? And would these setbacks apply to existing wells? Or is this only for new construction, getting a permit for a well and all that?
Correct. We're not going to go back and change wells that already exist. So if your wells are already in place, then this would not be applying. Clarification there would be, and I haven't memorized the languages. Where do we cross the line, board members, for new versus a repair? Or a drill deeper? Is that called out?
I don't remember seeing a call out for that. I mean, I think, simple repair is like a pump repair or something. We're not changing the existing well. If we're going deeper, then that means the well is inadequate. I think that may be a discussion, and certainly nothing in here saying that we still can't grant waivers. As always, there's going to be places where waivers is going to be required. But yeah, no, I think we certainly aren't going back and checking every well in town and saying no. But I think if it's a redrill or a redrill is obviously a new well. It's going to meet new requirements. If it's a deeper, I think that's a discussion. If it's a simple pump replacement, then that's a repair. I don't think would fall under the new well proposal. So new well requirements. But that's again just one member's opinion.
Okay, I think there would. Sorry, go ahead. I think there was something on section 5, page 6, just talking about what was the water supply certificate. I guess it doesn't apply to these setbacks and things, but this said that the water supply certificate needs to be used for all private drinking wells. The question was, is this even for existing ones or only for new ones that are getting built, new structures getting built?
Okay, that's a different question. Let me make sure we get back to that when we talk about certificates and then use requirements and the scroll down. I think what it's really going to come into is the water quality requirements. But that's a good point to make. And so, Francis, make a note to yourself if you would. Let's make sure we are clear, because I'm scrolling around a little bit. Apologies, but in the definitions there is a definition on pump replacement. So that has a purpose. It's defined as a pump replacement, and I believe there's another definition in here that talks about more significant repairs. So let's make sure those are clearly defined, so that then when we get down to these sections where we're talking about it, we can be clear as to what they're applying to. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. And so we were at...
So when it says that the certificate should be applied, like you're defining that in section 5, though. I'm not sure if you're answering my question. Sorry to belabor this, but issued for a private well prior to the issuance of occupancy permit for an existing structure. I mean, if you're living in a house, when are you issued an occupancy permit for an existing structure? You know what I mean?
I think, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, water supply certificates already exist.
They do. New? They do not. I mean, this is in the model regs. So maybe to answer Chris's question, I think the regulations are designed for permitting a new well, or that other definition I think, Matt, you were looking for was alter, which is in your, and that describes a more, that would be like a deepening or a hydrofracking, where you're actually changing the well in such a way that water characteristics may change. So I think the way I would view this water supply certificate is when somebody's drilling or altering a well in such a way that you're issuing a permit. And that may be with the construction of a new house, which would then get an occupancy permit. It may be that they're putting a new well in because they're putting an addition on the house, and that would require an occupancy permit. But I think it's mostly tied to the issuance of the well permit.
Okay. So
that's how I would view it.
Then I want to make sure that language is clear on that it's referring to that. Dan, what did you need to add?
No, just a quick question on that one. Property transfer. Would that be new occupancy permit with a property transfer and would require it? Same way we do a Title V inspection. There's generally like a fire safety inspection for carbon monoxide and smoke. So would the water supply certificate be part of a property transfer with a purchase?
So it isn't currently. So unless you're going to put it into your regulations.
Gavin.
I think that's what we want to get to. So whatever the means of getting that into our regulations are, whether it goes in this well regulation or another area, please advise.
Okay. And Chris, to address your point, you're right. I was not answering your question because we as a board haven't discussed it in order to land on what that answer would be. And obviously, Mr. Baker just expressed his opinion on what we think it should be. But I'm just calling out to make sure we have that clear in the language when this is final. I agree. We should figure that out to make sure it's clear. Obviously, well construction permit, you're building a well. But as Jim just mentioned, I think this should make sure it's clear as to somewhere that the altering, where does altering the well require a new permit so that that's included, right?
Yeah, thanks so much.
And
Can
then,
you hear me?
yes, Gina, we can hear you. Did you have something you need to say, Gino?
Well, I was trying to figure it out. I can't see my face over here. Can you tell them that they gave me more volume and also the picture? I can't see in the picture in my computer. Something is wrong.
I don't think I can help your volume at all, and it says your camera is not connected.
How come?
I don't know, Gino.
Oh, I raised my hand. It's nothing you can do there to make myself see.
Well, I invited you to the group so that you can talk and we can hear you.
Okay, as long as you're okay.
Your video, we did not turn off your video.
Okay, thank you.
So I looked at that. So to Kevin's point, water supply certificate, this section, as written, really, does it only apply to new construction? Does it apply to alterations? And then does it apply to transfer of property? I think this is one of those that we would want further conversation with our whole board. So, Francis, if you could make a note of that. And see what language we would have to add just to make sure it's clear as to what this covers.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure how good our records are. So if somebody sold a property that's got a well that's several decades old, are we going to have the well construction permit that's required? Hopefully.
Matt, probably the more challenging thing is that water well completion report. In there, DEM used to be the regulating agent, Department of Environmental Management. They gave it over to DEP, who started uploading a lot of the forms, so you can find a lot of them. And probably from, I don't know, the 2000s on, they're pretty good shape because they have to submit them electronically. But when you get back into the 90s and beyond, backwards, they're not as, they were issued for a long time, but they're not as obvious in the records.
Yeah.
So that would be a challenge.
And I'm sure the pumping test report could be a challenge too,
Right.
depending on the age of the property and the well. Okay. And it's also one that I think that depending on how strongly people feel, we could leave it this way to start and then try to see how it goes and modify the regulation in the future if we think that it needs to be strengthened further. Anything else on water supply certificates? Gino, you have video.
Yeah. I mean, people that have a well and they want to use it for drinking, it has to be filtered. Don't they supposed to, in order to drink it, don't they have to take care of it?
Yes, that's a part of the regulation for sure, Gino.
Right.
We're getting to that section just a little further because we're still right at the how do I get a construction permit? How do I make sure that my water supply has a proper certificate? And now well locations and use requirements. So this is where we were.
Thank you.
I think we're good on these distances. There was no further conversation about that, correct?
Beautiful.
And then this is
I'm reading. I'm reading what you're reading yourself.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
This obviously says potable water right here. So I think the other key thing, and this is a detail question of as we finalize this language, if we go back to that flow chart of buckets, are we making sure that every single bucket is called out the right or wrong way? So this only says potable.
Right.
So do any of the other buckets need setback requirements?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Title V has offset requirements to irrigation wells. They're less than, well, so yeah, I mean, you'd want to include the, I mean, when I do an irrigation well now, I look at, that's the main thing I look at because there's no irrigation well part of your well reg. So I make sure the irrigation wells, at least the distances Title V wants it away from the system.
And if Title V cares about irrigation wells, then we should care about agricultural wells used for crops for sure.
Right. So that's all on how you build those definitions. So it and how you then tie them into your offsets.
So I think based upon this section, I don't think we would have to rewrite a whole lot of it. I think it's just this point 2 that we either have to convert this to a table or have different sections for potable versus irrigation or agricultural crop.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay. And Jim, you said Title V at least has setback for septic. Any of these others? If you have an irrigation well, are any of these other setbacks appropriate?
This would be the mechanism for you to do that is in your well regulations.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, these offsets are for drinking water, potable water, and yeah, I like your idea of having a chart for all three. I'd imagine just the irrigation and agricultural will be less stringent than these offsets here.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking. Is it just going to be 2 lines for septic tanks and leaching fields? That's what I'm throwing out to this group. Do we think any of these offsets besides those 2 should apply to irrigation or agricultural crop water source?
So in Title V, I think you have to be 10 feet from the septic tank and 25 feet from the leach field to an to an irrigation well. So that's the offset that's in Title V.
And I guess I'm looking through the list for rationales like underground fuel storage or pesticide tank. Uh, my gut is having some offset from those would seem reasonable. You know, if we have no listed, then I can theoretically go 6.5 inches away from one of those. And we can't really say you can't. But I'm not sure what a reasonable is for either of those. Yeah, I'm not sure. But I feel like for at least some of them having some, even if it's just an engineering offset as opposed to even contamination or anything else going, there should be a buffer because as we know, things don't always go on the ground exactly where they were planned. So having some kind of just some leeway here going, yeah, you need to be away enough that if you're off a foot that you don't hit something that you really didn't mean to. But I'm not sure how we necessarily language that. I would also, of course, be if we're set off from pesticides, tanks, or underground fuel storage, the rationale is we're worried about contamination would be my assumption. That would we also be have that same level of concern for an irrigation well if we now have contamination from some underground potential source. It's less concerning than potable water, but it's still, for me anyway, somewhat concerning if we've got contamination from a known risk.
I agree with Dan's points because the same thing for if you're watering crops with a water source that is near manure storage or pesticides or fuel tanks, yeah, I think it makes sense to have some sort of offset. Probably not 400 feet, but some sort of protection there. So, Francis, if you could take a stab at some numbers, build that table out for us.
Okay.
Awesome. And then I think the rest would still apply or not apply. So, like, reserves the right to impose minimum setback requirements. I feel like that shouldn't just be restricted to potable water if we're going to say we want to have some setback requirement for based upon the usage of the well. And then similar stuff like each private well shall be located so that it's accessible for repair, maintenance, testing, and inspection. That should just be all wells, right?
I would agree with that.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes. The only point 2 called out potable. So the rest of these are all just every well, every well, every well, every well, and every well. Okay. That brings us to water quantity requirements. It's all about a pumping test report. Again, this one doesn't have a whole lot of comments on it, but it's a long section. So I don't see any recommended changes or suggestions for this whole section. Anybody have any thoughts or concerns or comments?
No, you're doing a good job.
Just as I remember, Francis and Jim probably know, I think the quantity requirements isn't really significantly changed from the past, right? It's fairly similar to what it was for quantity.
So what the state has kind of moved from is they moved to this peak flow definition. This is in the new reg, and it was in the previous iteration of this. Some towns have gone with, like the VA had kind of requirements for you needed 5 gallons a minute for 4 hours kind of thing. So I think what the state did is they looked at, if you have this many bedrooms, this many bathrooms, it kind of indicates people may use that much water. And the idea is you need this amount of water when people start their day. So the well should be able to have that much water.
As an engineer, I only found it odd that you can't have 2.5 bathrooms in a house. But they decide not to have that column, I guess. Then I'm going to roll past it, which brings us to water quality requirements. We are at 7:45. People still want to keep going with this for longer? We don't have much on our agenda tonight. Dan, keep going.
I'm okay. Maybe if you want to go to 8 o'clock on this one, although I think this is going to be probably a longer discussion than we may want to start at this point, unless we want to really commit to working through it. Because I think this is going to be probably our most challenging piece.
Maybe the thing to do then would be before our next meeting, we ask people to specifically read section 8, which is that long, with that flow chart in mind, and see something like a table. We're gonna have to come up with saying, well, this is what should apply to this bucket, this is what should apply to this bucket, etc. Would people be willing to do that in the off meeting time? Okay. When I send out the flow chart, I will specifically ask for that section. Okay. Any other comments, questions, thoughts on our well regulations? Or anyone in the audience want to provide any further input at this time? Take that as a no. Brings us to our 7:10 agenda item, discussion on mobile food truck regulations.
So at the last meeting, it was requested that we do a red line from the original. I had a family emergency, so I didn't get that ready for today.
Right. In that case, let's bump that to the next meeting. And now we are on our 7:15 p.m. agenda item on the infectious disease decision support tool. Our data is still unavailable to us, but they have started tracking mosquitoes for mosquito-borne illnesses, but no news is good news. It's the start of the season. So unless Jim has some insider information to share, I'm not aware of any mosquito-borne illness cases in our vicinity.
Nope. Like you say, no news is good news.
No news is good news. New COVID variants are on the rise. They have figured out that the acronym FLIRT works well for a couple of them. And so that's what you're seeing in the news, is that the FLIRT variants are going to be the popular ones this summer. And going into the fall, the CDC has asked our vaccine producers to pivot potentially to address these new variants, because the JN variants are kind of fading, and now we have some new popular variants to look for. But as is kind of typically the case, these are the KP2 and KP3 and KP another number. Each time you have a variant, it changes how that virus behaves. And so will your vaccine work as well? Maybe, maybe not. They're still contagious, because that's why they grow in the population, because they are contagious and they're spreading. So it looks like thus far there's not as severe a disease with it, which is nice. But it's early in the season, and summer is typically a dip for this. So Some professionals are saying it's going to be a light summer for COVID, but I think we just never know. Our wastewater numbers are just pretty low, so it doesn't look like any major changes happening from that perspective. So that's what we have for infectious diseases. Any other input or questions? Dan.
Just saying, not a lot of info, but certainly the most recent data for the COVID volume and week ending June 15th were 794 new cases and 5 deaths associated with COVID. So again, a couple weeks out, but that's the most recent that I've seen for quantitative for cases.
Thank you. Nothing further on that. That brings us to administrative matters. What we have on our list is meeting minute approval for June 12th. Has everybody had a chance to review the meetings for June 12th? I did not make the changes, and it was a process question that I want checked. It seems to me I found a lot of instances in the minutes of how would I say, words written based upon pronunciation but not meaning, if you know what I mean. So I feel they just need another review of a grammar check and spell check review just to make sure the right words are in there. So I'm not sure if that's just mistypes or what is leading to that problem. But Francis, would you mind taking, I'm not sure if you checked the June 12th. I know you checked and sent out some meetings from March, but have you looked at the June 12th minutes?
I can't remember. I think they're more last minute.
They just got up on Thursday, I think. So they're not old.
Yeah. I'll look through it and make any changes.
Thank you for that. And then I know you emailed us the March 27th minutes. Oh, apologies. You emailed just Kevin and I. So you're getting ready for those. We have not approved those minutes. I know they're old, right? But that was a long meeting. Is that why you sent them out to us?
I thought we did approve them like 2 meetings or 3 meetings ago.
Oh, did we?
I'll double check with Brenda.
Okay, just let me know what you need. You sent them to Kevin and I, Kevin Baker and I. And so if you're needing something from them, just could you clarify that? What you need from us?
I think there was just a lot of changes that had to be made to them. So
okay.
I'll talk to Brenda and send out an update.
And if we need to re-vote on them or vote on them, let's just make sure they get on the agenda officially for the next meeting.
Okay.
There's one note on the March 27 meeting, and it's Kevin Davis's name was spelled wrong up towards the top of those first page, about halfway down.
I have no correspondence to report. Anybody else have any correspondence? Nope. In that case, roundtable updates. Who wants to go first?
I only say that everything is fine.
Good. Kevin.
I just want to check in with Francis to see how everything went with the carnival.
Good. Inspections were done on Thursday morning. Everything looked good. So it was actually more impressive than I thought it was going to be.
Great.
So,
Good to hear.
yes.
Do we need to take more action on our portable toilet regs?
I don't believe so.
Like, do we need to have a public hearing and vote and approve them as regs, or?
I think we already did, right? Because I think I posted it in the paper and stuff.
Okay. I just want to make sure we follow all the proper steps because they're regulations, correct?
And I would just send them to DEP and we post in the paper again.
Okay. Any other updates for us, Francis?
Not that I can think of. Nope.
All right. That's all I have. Oh, Dan.
So I know we talked in the past about if there's any way we can get just quick, either monthly kind of just status report of conducted 5 Title Fives and 10 restaurant inspections and 3 complaints and cases of reportable diseases. Obviously not person identifiable, but just so we have those numbers, so we have a sense of the status of our community. As a regulatory body, we should know that our professionals are inspecting restaurants, and okay, we've had cases come up, and is this something that should be a safety signal that we should be looking at for either restaurants or foodborne or infectious disease or whatever? Is there a way we can, from Francis coordinating with Jim, but Francis, now that you're in house and settled in a little bit, of that sense of what kind of the activity report of the department of what's happening and what's going on, and just so we're aware, because it hasn't come up in a while, but it's always challenging when we hear, hey, we heard there were 5 cases of something in the schools. What are you guys doing about it? I hate having that be the first we've heard about it. Not that that's going to happen, but those kind of things come up, and it's, and when it comes forward, hey, does anybody know? Oh yeah, we know about this, but it never makes it to the board. So again, it's been quite a while since anything like that's happened, and so nothing been major. But it's nice from our side going, yeah, okay, we know the regular things that we are regulatorily responsible for are happening, and the things that aren't necessarily regulations, but just we're aware. Hey, yep, we got a case of TB. Okay, great. Not great, but it exists, and it's being managed. Would just be really helpful, I think, for me. I'm not sure about the other board members, but that status of what's happening in our community under our authority.
Thank you, Dan.
I hate adding more to work.
Yes, I think I'll express some desire to have some more of that. I would say maybe monthly is a little too often since it's every other meeting. Would something quarterly be okay for low urgency, just kind of summary projects? But I agree, as you're talking about the more urgent stuff, I would like to see those called out at the next available meeting, basically, as an alert. Would that work?
Yeah, I'll brainstorm with Jim and figure out something.
Okay. And yeah, let us know when. I mean, obviously, yeah, you've been here. How long have you been here now, Francis? Like a year and a half, basically?
Yeah, like 3 years now.
So yes, it doesn't have to be a long report for the first one, but as we kind of grow and be able to kind of produce something on a recurring basis, so we can just see some of those numbers, I don't think it would take long. But then I agree with Dan. There have been times in the past where you kind of hear about things through circuitous routes just because there are a lot of people involved. And
No problem.
thank you. Anything further? Gavin.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
I think that was a second by Gino.
Yes, sir.
Motion to adjourn. Roll call vote. Kevin Baker.
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Gino Fratelloni.
Yes, it's nice to see you guys.
Dan Kane.
And Kane votes yes.
And Matt Wason votes yes. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.